What am I going to talk about in this episode? Oh, that's an idea. Let's talk about what to talk about in your podcast. When you're starting a podcast, it's really important that you think through the topics that you're going to cover and how you're going to approach them. It's not a coincidence that there is definitely a connection between what you're talking about and how long people want to listen to you talking about that thing. That's just common sense, right? But did you know that if you don't pitch your podcast absolutely, perfectly from the beginning with your brand new listener, you've lost them. No chance to get them back. That's it. One and done. So the trick is to ensure that every time you're talking to your ideal podcast listener on your episodes, you're telling them exactly what they're going to get right from the beginning. And what should they be getting? Well, that's the point of this. The first stage of figuring out what to talk about in your podcast is get an understanding of the kind of person who's listening to your podcast and what they want to hear. Without that, what's the point? So you need to do a little bit of work here. I know that you would love the idea of just plugging a microphone in and hitting record and then publishing whatever comes out of your mouth into the apps and enjoying all those delicious download numbers rolling into your stats. Unfortunately, it doesn't work quite like that. You need to understand what your listener wants from you. Now, it's not like you have to follow strict rules around this. This is not radio broadcasting. Nobody's going to throw a book at you if you veer off topic for a second, or you don't do the crunch and roll in exactly the right way that they do in radio, like poor radio broadcasters have to deal with. So many rules. However, you do need to follow your own style guide. And the way you're going to get that style guide is as follows. You're going to research what kind of person would find value in your content. Once you've understood who they are, you need to do a little bit of research into what kind of content they're already consuming, what they like about it, what they dislike about it, and where they're finding that content. Are they purely podcast listeners? If they are, brilliant. You're off to a good start. Do they like YouTube content? In which case you might want to consider whether a YouTube channel to accompany your podcast might be quite a smart thing to do. Are they hanging out in places like Reddit and Quora? Great, you can go and ask them what kind of content they are looking for. Start conversations with them. Maybe they're just like your Uncle Frank and like to scour Facebook all the time. In which case, great, you could set up a community there and do your research through that. Whichever you choose, you're going to need to do the work and figure out what will make those people hanging out in those places looking for that kind of content want to listen to yours. If you've already got an established audience, maybe through an email newsletter or through social media, then you could do a little bit of corner cutting here. I mean, you don't have to necessarily go out of your way to spend all day in the communities engaging with these people to find out what they would want from a podcast that you're planning. You could do it through a survey. There's all kinds of options for this now. You've got Google surveys, there's SurveyMonkey, free tiers in some of these as well. Offer an incentive of maybe, I don't know, a $50 Amazon voucher, maybe less, and see if you can get some feedback on the kind of content that people would be looking for from your imagined podcast. Okay, so now you've got the idea for your podcast and you know who wants to listen to it. So what we're going to have to do now is figure out if there's any way that we can cash in on some trends. Is there anybody already talking about this that is getting known in the space? Is there anything within your topic that's become viral because it's newsworthy? A lot of people are talking about it at the time. Well, if that's the case, cash in. Absolutely. Plunder that. Get that content and figure out how you can repurpose it and present it as your own. This is where the knowledge piece comes in. Too often I see podcasters that think they're experts on a thing and they'll do a podcast around the thing, and then very quickly it becomes quite apparent they don't actually know all that much about the thing. In podcasting, you're going to have a variety of different listeners that are going to be at different stages on the ladder of learning. Some will be near where you are, some will be way down. There could be some that even know more than you. So you need to figure out how you can stay on top of the latest happenings and developments in your topic so that if these people are listening to your show, they don't dismiss it out of hand. It's better for you to have an alternative perspective at the same knowledge level as them versus them knowing more than you and quite publicly calling you out for it. So don't get lazy. Don't talk about a topic you're not prepared to continue investing in terms of your knowledge. And this is why I suggest that people listen to other podcasts in the space so that if there are any gaps in your knowledge or any alternative perspectives, you get a total coverage of those in your mind before you start putting out episodes on those topics. This is especially if you have a topic that has lots of subtopics that cross over. So how are you going to connect this content that you're making with your listeners? Well, that's where the personal touch comes in. Anybody can start a podcast, but not anybody can start a good podcast. And what makes a good podcast? There's a number of factors. Obviously, the sound quality. I preach about this all the time, but unless you've got decent recording equipment, at least an external microphone, preferably a fit-for-purpose dynamic microphone, you need to have the right content to begin with, well-researched topic at that, so you know what you're talking about, and structuring it in a way that is accessible to as many people that would be interested in that topic as possible. And the way you deliver that is going to make the difference. People will tolerate less than perfect sound quality and maybe topics that are delivered by somebody that might not know everything about everything. What they won't tolerate is somebody doing it with a dull voice and zero charisma. So, this is where the self-awareness part comes in. If you don't think that you are enthusiastic, charismatic, and personable enough to hold down this podcast, maybe consider working with somebody that is. This is where a co-host could come in handy. If you're a brand or business, think about who in your team has that office bants charisma that everyone loves and everyone warms to. And along with that personality that you're hopefully bringing to your listeners, you'll also have personal experience in the topic you're talking about. Definitely bring that to the table. What we don't want to hear is a lot of textbook stuff around a thing that's very generic without you bringing why you're an expert on this to the table. For example, if your expertise is around finance, but yet you don't share the stories where you maybe didn't have any money, perhaps bring that to the table so that people can get an idea for the before and after. You then, in their mind, become that person that can make the transformation. You've been there, you've done it, here's how you did it. That is always going to be a much more alluring prospect for a podcast than, oh, I know everything about finance, and here's what you need to know. Not to mention, aside from the fact that people feel like, they're getting actual benefit of your experience, they're building a connection with you. They're getting that thing in their head where they're going, this person's like me. Oh, I like them. I can learn from them. And that is a win when it comes to your engagement. One of the things that's often overlooked by new podcasters that come into this without really knowing what they're doing is they forget about the balance of features, so entertainment and education. Everyone is really keen to get into the education piece. But what good is education if I'm not entertained? Think about when you were in school. I'm sure that you had teachers that really held your attention because they were funny, they were warm, you liked them, their personality came across, right? The teachers that didn't hold the room, didn't engage you, were those dull people that would literally stand over an overhead projector or at a textbook and just read the thing to you. Not interesting, is it? Think about that when it comes to your podcast. Your listeners do not want you to read textbooks to them. If they can find out what you're telling them through scrolling Wikipedia, that's what they're going to do, especially if you've got the personality of a wet lettuce. Just give that some thought. Are there any features that you can bring in that bring you and your personality, and if you've got guests, those of your guests, off the earphones and in front of them that they can visualize it? Talking of guests, obviously it is the go-to with podcasts, especially in the business category, it usually takes the format of someone hosts the podcast, the thought leader, and then gets a guest of the week on, or a guest of the fortnight, or a guest of the month, depending on the cadence. Now, there's nothing wrong with that per se, but if you're using having a guest on your podcast as a way of carrying your podcast, so you don't have to do quite as much work in research and having that thought leadership, you're doing it for the wrong reasons, bruh. Rethink that one. If that's your sole reason for having them on the podcast, consider going solo. Push yourself out of your comfort zone so you are the one coming out with the insights. Where a guest brings real value is if you are an all-rounder thought leader in your space, but there are certain elements of your industry where you're not quite as smart or savvy or clued up on. That's where the guest can come in handy to fill in those knowledge gaps. You're collaborating. You're not taking business from each other. You're collaborating in the education of your ideal client or listener. I'll give you a very personal example of this. I am not an expert in value for value. Value for value is the new type of payment system that some podcasters are sticking on their podcast feeds. What it means is when someone listens to your podcast, they can pay you cryptocurrency in return for the edutainment you've given them. Now, I know nothing about how this all works. I cannot set up a Lightning feed or an Albi account or any of that stuff. I've got no clue how any of that works. I do use some apps that have that in place, and I don't understand them, which is why if I was going to be doing a podcast about value for value, hint, hint, sneak peek, I would actually get someone that's an expert in the field to come on the podcast and talk to you about it. Watch this space. See, it takes nothing away from your respect level of my knowledge. It just enhances the information that I can give you. There's a knowledge gap there. As far as I'm concerned, I want to fill it for you, for the benefit of you, the listener. And remember, why are you doing this? Are you doing it because you genuinely want to bring knowledge and insight to the world, or are you doing it for a crack? If it's the former, then you might well consider having some sort of listener feedback feature. Maybe they can email you, they can leave a voice note for you. Lots of podcast websites now offer this. There's a WordPress plugin, I believe, as well. I will link to those in the episode description for you. Ideally, though, you want some sort of system where your listeners can contact you, reach out to you, and provide feedback on your topics, or even ask you questions. There is no better feeling, believe me, than having an actual listener get in touch with you wanting to know more. And at the end of the day, you're doing this for them, or you should be. So for that reason, leave some open-ended questions in your podcast content. Ask some questions to that seemingly non-existent entity, that person out there that's listening to what you have to say. You never know, you might get a bite on the hook. And talking about features, how about having some recurring segments that your show can become known for? A great example of this is Commode and Mayo's Take, a film podcast where Mark Commode, a known film journalist, joins Simon Mayo, a very famous, experienced UK broadcaster, and they discuss the latest films. This show used to be on the radio, and it built its own community with its own language. They have lots of in-jokes that their regular listeners very quickly clock onto. Now, I'm not suggesting that you fill your podcast episodes with in-jokes. Really, don't do that. Certainly not at the beginning of your episodes. But if there's a recurring theme that keeps coming up, while you're educating new listeners about that recurring theme, let that breathe. Let that develop legs of its own. And you never know, eventually, your show might become synonymous with these little features and recurring elements. And going back to the central theme here of what to put in your podcast, there is nothing wrong with going back over topics you've covered before. It can actually be really useful and helpful to a listener or viewer on YouTube if you remind them about something you've already taught them, but they might need to have it replenished in their memory. Now, a lot of creators refer to this as repurposing content, but I would go one further than that. I would say, think about it almost like it's a series of books. Sometimes your book covers one particular story. Another book might revisit that as an old character. Nothing wrong with you making reference to these old characters with brand new, fresh versions. In some ways, that's actually quite beneficial to you because it then means your new listeners, who might not have the time to go back through your old back catalogue, are going to hear that same content, and it might resonate with them in a different way at a different time that will lead to a better outcome for both of you. So there you go. That's my ideas for what to talk about in your podcast. I just would like to say to you, if you are thinking about starting a podcast, brand new one, remember, we don't need another Diary of a CEO. That podcast has been done to death. It has hundreds, if not thousands of clones. Think about how you can bring something new to the table. Doesn't have to be completely original, but if you are thinking about setting up 2 microphones and recording a 45-minute conversation about a guest topic, you might be struggling to build any kind of audience for it. Unless you go and check out my other piece on this, How to Grow a Podcast Audience. You'll find the link to that in the episode description as well. So in conclusion, what you need to be thinking about when it comes to establishing what to talk about on your podcast. Get an idea for your listener, who they are, what they want to hear, where they're hanging out. Try and figure out if there are any trending topics that have become newsworthy recently. Bone up on them and get knowledgeable. Ensure that your knowledge is up to date, that you're across all the latest happenings and trends in your space. Bring personal stories to the table. Don't just read from a textbook. Balance your content between educational and entertaining. Edutainment is key in this medium. Have guests, but have them for the right reasons. Don't just rely on them to carry your content for you week to week. Encourage listener interaction. Bring your listeners into the content if you can. And try and build up thematic themes and segments that can continue throughout the life of your podcast. I hope this helps. If you've got any questions, reach out to me. If you need more in-depth help from me, you know where I am. Well, that's it for this latest episode of the Podmaster podcast. If you've enjoyed it, please do leave us a review in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from. Make sure you're following the show, and you can find out more about the show and stay in touch at podmastery.co. That's podmastery.co. Speak to you next time.